I would say for me, I felt like I was struggling a little more. But again, I look back now and go, if I complained, shame on me. I was 20-some years old and living in New York and getting paid, and now and again I was on TV. That doesn't suck.
Hello and welcome to the Not Ready for Primetime Project. We're Gary Seath and Brad Robinson.
And you're not. This
week, we have a new episode of My SNL Story, Brad.
Yeah, actor, writer, producer, TV host, columnist. His socio-political blog, Gary Has Issues, has been going strong for well over a decade now. Covers everything from government and politics, civil rights, family, entertainment. Since 2021, he's been the co-host of The Gary and Kenny Show, cast member from seasons 8 through 10. Very excited to have with us Gary Kroeger. Hey, Gary, how are you?
Well, thank you. When I hear seasons 8 through 10, it always surprises me because I still feel like I'm part of the new generation of Saturday Night Live. I do, because, the original era was so epic and so iconic that I still feel like I'm one of the new kids. But I did the show 40 years ago. And given that we had the 50th anniversary, that means I'm in the first 20, the first chunk.
Well, you are.
Within the first 10 years.
You're also in that first group of new folks too, right?
I am. I'm in the very distinguished and distinguishable, I believe, Ebersol era.
Yes.
The 5 years in there. And if I may offer a commentary, a little editorializing, those years are often overlooked by the show itself, but not to the fans. And I find that out all the time.
I think you're right, yeah.
Is people will say, why don't we see more of those 5 years, the first half of the 80s? And, I don't know what the answer is exactly. It's not Lauren's show then, and he has to acknowledge it, but at the same time, he doesn't have to herald those years.
Right.
So I think we get thrown under the bus a little bit, but fans, people that I meet are very specific about their era. And basically 50-year-olds are that era.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
We've talked about this as we've talked about other anniversary shows even, and how, little there was from that era.
Especially as you moved on.
In the beginning, when we had a 15th anniversary and maybe the, 20th, 25th, I feel that they gave some attention to each era. You certainly can't deny Eddie Murphy.
Right.
You can't deny Marty Short, and they don't, and Billy Crystal, and now really Julia. But otherwise, that era sort of gets overlooked as a part of the franchise, but it saved the franchise.
Oh, yeah.
If I may.
Yeah.
After the first 5 years, the Jean Doumanian year came in. No fault of hers, really. There was no way for her and that cast to win after what the first 5 years had established. They were going to be targeted by critics and fans.
Right.
But it took Dick to come in and recognize the talent of Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo and bring along Tim Kazurinsky, et cetera, and so on. And then know to bring in Billy Crystal and Marty Short, Chris Guest. Right. Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. But let's go back if we could, Gary. We like to start every one of these shows with, when did you first hear of Saturday Night Live?
I am the first generation. I was in college in 1975, freshman year, heard about this show coming up. And, the show was pretty much under the radar in the beginning. So I don't know what caused us to watch the first show, because who stays home at 10:30 in the Midwest on a Saturday night in college? But we suddenly did. And the first sketch where Belushi has a heart attack in his English lesson.
Yep.
Michael O'Donoghue, the bit, has a heart attack. And then John mimics it and has a heart attack. And then Chevy Chase comes out as if he's a stage manager and says, live from New York. We knew collectively in my dorm that this was something for us and it was going to be different. So we were hooked.
What role did the show play in your development? You're finding it older. You said you're already in college. So you were already on your path of wanting to be an actor at that point, right? You're already down that road?
Oh, yeah. I was at Northwestern and I wanted to be an actor. That's an interesting question because, I never wanted to be in comedy at all. I was kind of a funny guy. I was the class clown. But that's not where I thought a career would happen. And so I didn't watch Saturday Night Live thinking that's where I want to be someday. But I was thinking those are people speaking to my sense of humor and my generation's humor. So I glommed onto it. And really, in my career, very quickly, I got more frustrated with traditional theater at an institution like Northwestern and found the other funny people connecting to Saturday Night Live and Second City being close by in Chicago that we started creating improv groups. That was sort of the explosion of the 70s. And I was in a group called Laugh Track, and then Brad Hall and Paul Barros put together a theater company called the Practical Theater, which attracted Julia Louis-Dreyfus and me and a whole bunch of other people. And suddenly we were sort of, by the end of our college careers, these improv satirical comedians. But I still thought it was just something to do as opposed to a career.
It was, so you did that in college at Northwestern.
Yeah.
How long did you guys do that?
Well, we were all graduating at various points and things. So it would be from the late 70s through the early 80s. Brad Hall, and I give him credit for this, and maybe it was Brad and Paul, had this brilliant idea. See, we did these little renegade comedy shows in a 45-seat theater on Howard Street in Chicago. And we would beg audiences to come in, and we would do our stream of consciousness, physical but cerebral humor. That sounds really full of itself, but we would drop our pants to get a laugh, but at the same time, we wanted to make social commentary. So we would do these shows, and the truth about comedy, just like Saturday Night Live, only 3 out of 10 sketches are really good. It's like a batting average that'll get you into the Hall of Fame, but 7 sketches sucked, right? Well, we took all of the sketches that were good and coincidentally in 1982 put them in a review called The Golden 50th Anniversary Jubilee. So we were pretending to have a 50th anniversary in 1982. And we opened it next to Second City. We got their spillover crowd. It was a huge hit in Chicago. And we weren't looking for Dick Ebersol to be in the audience and Bob Tischler. We just heard that they were, and they wanted to talk to us the next day. This is September of 82. And they said, can you be in New York next week? And that's the story. And suddenly I'm this comedian.
That's remarkable. And
it's
that is
crazy.
It's such a unique audition story, really, right?
It is. Best way to audition, you don't know you're auditioning.
That's right.
What brought Dick and Bob Tischler to you guys? Was Tim Kazurinsky? He was involved, right? Getting them to actually see you?
I've
Is
never.
that true, or did I make that up?
No, you didn't make it up. I've never gotten the straight story. Here's what Tim tells me, and Tim would know. Tim, I think, came to see me. Now, when I say that, it sounds like I'm bragging. People, my God, the cast is Brad Hall, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, and Paul Barros, who's a brilliant, brilliant performer. But somebody said there's this guy that you need to see in this show. So my agent called me up and said, Saturday Night Live wants you to put tape together. Just me. So I went to an office, my agent's office, and I just did this stream of consciousness where I'm doing, all the Beatles and Ed Sullivan and may God bless. I'm doing Red Skelton and the tree from the Wizard of Oz. I mean, just all these weird things all together. I didn't know where it's going, out into the ether. I must have come across like I was insane and on ecstasy. But they got the tape, and on the basis of that, I'm told Dick and Bob came to see the show. But they didn't just see me. They saw Brad and Julia and Paul as well and said, hey, we've got the nucleus of a new team for Saturday Night Live, like the original cast in a sense, and they hired us all.
Can we take a minute then while we're here? You mentioned you weren't that in tune to the show. I guess my question, how in tune were you guys when you came to the show? Season 6, as you mentioned, Gene's season, it is what it was, the shortened version. Season 7, maybe not too much better. Michael O'Donoghue gets fired halfway through. Dick Ebersol takes almost half the cast out going into season 8. And then you guys come in almost at the last minute.
Yep.
Were you guys aware? What was the vibe showing up?
We didn't watch Saturday Night Live at that time. The original show was over, and I stopped watching, as did a lot of people stopped watching. It's not that I didn't care, but my cast was gone, and I was now focused on what I was doing and the comedy that we were doing with the practical theater. So I wasn't watching it. I was vaguely aware of Eddie Murphy, and I was aware of the name Joe Piscopo, because you can't forget that name. And vaguely aware of, I'm from Jersey, you from, a few of the things that he did. So the name Joe Piscopo stuck out. Otherwise, I'm oblivious. Wow. So Dick Ebersol brings us into his office and says, I want you to see what we've been doing. Well, there's Christine Ebersol and Tim Kazurinsky, Robin Duke, Mary Gross, Tony Rosato, I think, and Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo. And I thought to myself, why would they get rid of any of those people? That's a great cast. Why are we here? What do I do that Rosato couldn't do? Or, Christine Ebersol has got everything. So we didn't know why we were there. And then he showed us the sketches of Eddie Murphy, Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, Tyrone Green. And we're looking at each other going, they've got a emerging superstar. Yeah. Why are we here? My recollection is that Dick said, Eddie's already getting a little complacent because he's got a big movie coming out called 48 Hours, and he's already got his sights beyond this, and we want to scare him a little bit. We want to shake him up. We want to get back to basics with a new, energetic cast. Okay.
That has to be great to hear. Yeah.
Oh, it gets worse. Every Wednesday, and it's still the same. On Monday, you meet the host. On Tuesday, everybody writes. They stay up all night, and you read the scripts on Wednesday. So on Wednesday afternoon, they have me, Brad, and Julia, and Paul perform our theater act in the room where we read scripts. It's furniture showroom lighting. Everybody's got the drops from having a sandwich, and it's packed with cast, crew, and writers. And we do a cerebral, physical cabaret comedy show for them, and it bombed. Bombed. Not a sound. A smile mainly out of sympathy. I remember Robin Duke going, oh, those poor kids. Eddie Murphy came up to me and he said, Kroeger, you're the whitest man in America. He wasn't being mean. He was saying, hey, it's okay, kid. I see you. I've got my eyes on you. You're all right. Trying to make us feel better because we wanted to just leave, get on a bus and go back to Chicago. The result was nobody was inspired to write for us. They were all going, why the hell did they get rid of the people they did for these kids? So we had and Julia would tell you the same story, first year, very difficult.
And how close to that first show do you guys get to New York? Are you there a month before your first show?
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we did a couple of things from our stage show. In fact, one of the sketches we did in that show was we did this thing called the PTC Club, which was a spoof of those religious faith healer shows. And I improvised as a faith healer trying to cop a feel with women, which again, I don't know if I would do it today, but it was a good stage act. And it was all improvised, trying to cop a feel by healing a woman by touching her breast. Whatever. Julia had this funny character called April, May, June, and Brad Hall had the greatest hair you've ever seen. Paul Barros came out as Jesus. So it was a bit irreverent, but that was our first show. Yeah. Otherwise, we didn't know how to write for the medium at all.
And it's a very interesting first show because the host isn't there. Chevy does the whole thing remote.
Chevy Chase, thank you. You remember more than I do. Chevy, I'm not fond of Chevy Chase. I liked him on Saturday Night Live. I love him as Clark Griswold. Otherwise, I've found him to be a very pompous, not very given, self-centered individual. And I'm sorry, Chevy Chase fans out there want to hang me right now. I've met him a couple of times, and I can tell some stories that just make you not feel terrific about him.
Sure.
Because here he was to be our host, and he didn't want to make the trip to New York. So he did it from a remote, and you'd see him introduce the band from a TV screen or something. It was really, really disappointing.
When did you get the word that week he wasn't coming? Like, how was it? Wednesday, Monday?
I don't remember because it was 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think not until the last moment, as I recall, because I expected to meet Chevy Chase. And then it was really disappointing. Now, at the same time, guess who took the reins of the show? Eddie Murphy and Joe Piscopo.
Right.
So I was being introduced to this superstar emerging, and they really didn't need a guest host. If you've got Eddie Murphy in the show, you really don't need a guest host.
And it's an interesting episode because he's not there. The cast gets to shine a bit more amongst yourselves. Yeah. He's only in like one kind of quote unquote sketch. He tries to pull a land shark sketch off with Julia.
Yeah.
So this being a really awkward first show and kind of like you said, you had Eddie and Joe Piscopo there to kind of take the reins of things, but it also offered you guys who you said, writers didn't want to write for you at this point. They didn't really know you guys, but it kind of, because there wasn't a host, you guys got a little bit more airtime probably than you may have.
Well, no, Eddie got more airtime.
Well, yeah.
Eddie and Joe got more airtime. And Tim Kazurinsky has always been the smartest person in the business that I've ever known. Tim figured out the news early on, and he had several go-to news characters like Dr. Jack that would always make him a funny presence on the show.
Right.
I would say the only regret I have, and again, I think Brad and Julia would say the same thing, is we didn't understand television. We didn't understand sketch writing of this kind. We didn't understand how to create characters and hook phrases, how to ingratiate ourselves with the writers. We were really just thrown to the wolves based on our energy, and that wasn't enough. We needed somebody to sort of say, hey, sit in that writer's room until 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
If that's what it takes. We didn't know. It took a couple of years to really figure it all out.
So did you see the change that season even for, your relationship with the writers and kind of things starting to happen for you guys? Or
eventually they figure out that you're nice people.
Yeah.
I had a nickname, No Problem Kroeger, which was flattering on one hand, but it also meant you didn't have to feed the beast. The squeaky wheel does get the grease. And I learned that. I never became a squeaky wheel, but, Andy Kurtzman, Elliot Wald, Nate Herman, David Sheffield, Barry Blaustein, they all started to like me. And Julia's talent has always been a supernova. And even though I don't think she would look back fondly at the show and think that she had a lot of stuff to do, everybody identified, wow, she's talented. She can do anything. And Brad is such a presence, and he had the news.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was clearly part of the show.
He got the desk right away.
Yeah. I would say for me, I felt like I was struggling a little more. But again, I look back now and go, if I complain, shame on me. I was 20-some years old and living in New York and getting paid, and now and again I was on TV. That doesn't suck.
No. It even becomes a running bit, right? Gary has no screen time.
Yes. It's not a running bit you really want, but the idea, the idea, you remember Bill Murray was sort of obscure in his first shows, and he came out and he did the confessional piece where he says, basically, I suck.
Yeah.
Right.
And then he took off. Well, I was trying to do my version of that. I'm not Bill Murray. I don't know that it really worked, but it did give a little bit of something for the writers to have a little fun with. And this sounds dark, but me committing suicide at the start of a show by putting a gun to my head. There was a funny joke. Tim comes in through the dressing room and says, hey, I was just with your parents. My parents? They didn't even tell me they were here. And they cut my sketch, and I pull a gun out, and it says, of course, live from New York on Saturday night. So it was a funny way to make a very dark comment about my disgruntlement.
You mentioned Eddie and Eddie Murphy's rise. I think there's 2 big episodes from that first season. You're on season 8. The Chevy Chase one, like I said, that he does remotely. And Eddie Murphy becomes the first and since only cast member to host while they were on the show. What was that like? Was there a lot of resentment behind it? Or, as you mentioned, you guys could see where this ship was going and you guys were on board?
We were in the presence of Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy was 19 years old. And when I got there, he was just this really friendly guy who wrote his autograph on everything, lampshades, telephones would all say Eddie Murphy. He was practicing his signature. 48 Hours came out, and it changed the zeitgeist. Suddenly, he was the bigger star than Nick Nolte in terms of what people remembered. He was such a breakout phenomenon that when he then came out in a sketch, whether it was Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, anything, you could hear the audience go, "Oh, it's Eddie Murphy."
Right.
I always compare it, and you guys are too young, but on the old Lucy show, if John Wayne made an entrance, the audience would stop, they'd applaud, you'd have to acknowledge, and then they'd go on with the show.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost like that with Eddie. You had to wait for the audience to get over their excitement.
Wow.
He was that big overnight.
Jesus.
Then Beverly Hills Cop comes out.
Right.
Trading Places. Unbelievable. Just bang, 3 movies in a row. So we knew that we were watching somebody spectacular. And he could improvise with confidence in front of anybody. He could make garbage come to life. So when he hosted the show, the first time he hosted the show, Nick Nolte was supposed to be.
Right.
Nick got there and went, "I can't do this. You'll be better off without me. I got to go." And he went off and got drunk in a bar in Mogadishu or something. And Eddie took over the show, but nobody resented him. The audience didn't feel cheated.
Right.
In fact, I think they felt rewarded.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. You get more Eddie on screen and you call it out blatantly like, hey, he's going to host this week.
It's the Eddie Murphy show.
And he did his stand-up, for which he became so explosive.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody was happy.
Yeah. One of the highlights of that episode was the Merry Christmas, Damn It sketch with the clip of you and Julia as Donnie and Marie. That was...
I just remember it was early in my career that we got a little bit of something from an incest joke. Again, these aren't things I would do today.
No, they're not.
Because it got such a laugh, we did it again.
Yeah.
And I think we did it again.
Yes.
Same joke. Only the last time she was pregnant. Horrible joke. Horrible.
Still funny. Still funny.
But it was one of those things that endured, you were saying like in the clip shows afterwards for years and years, that clip was in Christmas episodes.
I've seen Julia on talk shows within the last decade or less, and they run that clip.
Yeah.
Look, like I said, I was close to it all.
Yeah.
I watched Eddie Murphy explode. I was at the beginning of Julia's career. I'm part of the images of her career. And so I pinch myself all the time. I get invited to the 50th, and I'm not in the show, although I cleverly got into the end of the show.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm with these people. I'm invited to the party. I'm listening to Tom Hanks talk to Alec Baldwin. I'm a fly on the wall, with people that I've admired and their craft. And so many people admire, and I get to be there. So, again, that doesn't suck. Yeah. That's going to be my autobiography. This didn't suck. I actually think that's a good title.
It is really good, actually.
That'll be the subject of our thank you email to you.
Yeah.
That didn't suck, Gary.
That didn't suck.
Gary.
Thank you.
One last question about that Eddie Murphy episode, and you may not even remember, but is there any truth that nobody knew until the very last second when it happened that Steve Martin was showing up during the good nights? Do you remember that at all?
I believe that I didn't know.
Yeah.
I believe it was a surprise.
Like even
and
Eddie
again, I was
himself
like,
didn't know.
oh my God, it sort of anchored us to the original show.
Yeah.
It was a reminder that, oh, look, because he was iconic with the show as well as his own career, but with Saturday Night Live and with Gilda and all of that. That was a surprise. Total surprise.
So how are you guys feeling at the end of that season 8? There was a lot of cash shuffling after season 6, after season 7. At first, I was thinking everyone must be loving life because it's the first time since the change from season 3 to season 4 where the cast didn't change. They kept the same cast from one season to the next. But as I was looking stuff up and researching, that almost wasn't the case, correct?
Well, thank you for bringing up that dark memory. That's funny. No. I'm glad you did, actually, because yes, after that first show, I was not brought back. And I was it. I was the only person dropped. And I was devastated. And I was already scheduled to give the commencement address at my high school. And I had just gotten the news, and nobody knew that I wasn't coming back to the show. And I'm talking to high school students, and it's so sad. Remember to follow your dreams, kids. Life is what you make. It was just the saddest day of my life.
Oh my.
But soon after, I get a call from Dick Ebersol and says, "Can you meet me at Yankee Stadium tomorrow? I want to talk to you." Well, I'm in Cedar Falls, Iowa. That's a 16-hour drive. Yes, I'll be there. I get in my car. I drive all the way straight to Yankee Stadium, and there's Dick. And he sits up there and he says, "Brad Hall came into my office and said, you really screwed the pooch with Kroeger. He's a funny guy.
Oh,
You
wow.
just didn't use him right."
Mm-hmm.
And Dick said, "I'm going to give you another shot." And so I came back. Nobody knew except that I tell the story, because I'm actually, it's a good story.
Yeah.
He brought me back, and I knew enough now to start to sit in the writers' rooms, and that was what led to Needleman and some other things that led to me having enough momentum to be included with the big change that happened between the next 2 years.
That really did kind of help you on the show take off, is coming back.
Yeah, it helped. Again, I never had the chance to really take off, but now I knew how.
Right.
And look, like I said, I never knew what was going on. I didn't know Marty, Billy, and Chris were only going to do the show for a year. I thought I'm now going to have a couple of years, which it takes everyone. If you look at the careers on Saturday Night Live, it always takes a couple of years to get your sea legs and to figure it out and to start to emerge with characters. I felt like now, what became the last year, I got it. I know what to develop. But then, sadly, it was over.
Because even season 9, you can see that's where a lot of your characters started to come up. We saw Walter for the first time that season.
Yeah, Walter.
El Dorco character.
Well, El Dorco was from the previous year. Again, I was starting to figure it out. El Dorco was a lovely little character. It was always a nice little parable, I thought, about the kid that gets picked on wins in the end. I mean, it's always, to me, a good story. And the audience liked El Dorco, and I got to make out with Julia and Jamie Lee Curtis, if I recall. So I was finding myself, but that's what led me to have enough foundation, I think, for Dick to ask me back for the big change here.
Mm-hmm. And as you started to mention, that season 9 finale, we got the Ira Needleman sketch.
Ira Needleman.
Yeah.
And, Ira Needleman doesn't make the retrospectives now, although I think it deserves to. It's been rerun a few times, but it hasn't been on any retrospectives. But people to this day who may have seen it once still sing the song and remember everything about it. The University of Iowa Dentist School plays the Needleman video to incoming students.
Didn't somebody come up to you at the 50th and talk to you about that? What it meant to them?
Well, yeah. Keegan-Michael Key came up to me at the 50th and said Ira Needleman is what informed him as an 11-year-old of how risque you could get with comedy. And he also paid me another compliment, which I'm happy to share.
Please do.
He said the other thing was the Superman sketch, because when you took a bullet and flew into those chairs, he said that's what physical comedy is. And here's what he said. Jim Carrey came on the scene years later, right?
Mm.
He compared Jim Carrey to me. So young Keegan-Michael Key said, well, Jim Carrey is doing what Gary Kroeger established in physical comedy. So that's Jim Carrey doesn't know that, and he certainly wasn't imitating me. But in my little narrative, I got a little piece of comedy DNA.
Yeah.
And it throws the heck out of me.
That Superman sketch is hilarious. When the other two guys bounce the bullet. Who was it catches it in his teeth, and then you just take the fall.
Rich Hall, I believe, caught it in his teeth.
Yeah,
right?
it was Rich Hall.
Yeah. And then, of course, you've got the real Superman there, who, by the way, was one of the nicest people. Can I tell you a quick story about Chris Reeve?
Please.
We're running out of time.
No.
Chris was a great guy. Great guy. We went out to dinner. And I said, hey, Chris, I was a Superman freak as a little boy. In fact, I had a Superman suit I wore to school in first and second grade. But my cape would bunch up in my pants, right?
Uh-huh.
And somebody, Julie Nielsen, said, Gary Kroeger, are you wearing a diaper? Gary Kroeger's wearing a diaper. In second grade, you can't say that's my cape because I'm Superman. So I was humiliated. Well, he loved the story so much, and I don't blame him for this, but he stole it. He told it on a talk show, and I remember the audience going, "Oh, that's the sweetest story." And I don't blame him because coming up with panel, as they call it when you do a talk show, is tough. So I gave him a chestnut. That's another piece of showbiz DNA that I have a piece of.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Kids, if you're going to be Superman at school, don't wear the cape.
You guys did get a lot of great hosts, I got to say. There's a run in the middle of season 9. Don Novello comes back as Father Guido Sarducci, Michael Palin, you're there for the infamous Don Rickles episode, and Robin Williams. I mean, there's some great hosts. Like, what other hosts did you love?
And I have to tell you, there was an edict that went out because Lorne Michaels had left the show and was creating the new show. And he said to people, you ain't doing Saturday Night Live if you want to do the new show. We didn't know. He didn't know. No one knew at the time the new show would take a nosedive. But we didn't get that first year, especially those first years, a lot of big names for that very reason. It's always hard for me to name a host because there are people like Chris Reeve that I just got to know on a personal level that I loved. Howard Hessman I loved because he was a true improv comedian, and really he memorized the scripts as I tried to do too and not use cue cards. We really respected that. I loved Don Novello. Michael Palin was that to me was my messiah, you know, and to most of us, because Monty Python was the godfather to all of this. And to find out that he's a uniquely nice human being and brilliant, that was a highlight. Robin Williams was Robin Williams. I didn't have much to do on the show, but Dick said, look, you are to shadow Robin Williams because if he wanders off, you need to bring him back to the studio because he was a bit mercurial, you know. And I remember in the green room before the show, he was sitting on the couch, right? But Robin was able to go into almost a trance, almost invisible, right? People, guests of the show are coming in to watch the show and don't even notice Robin Williams, the guest star, on the couch because he's so quiet. And then at a certain point, when there were enough people in the room for whatever reason, he turns it on and he became, oh, Robin Williams. And then the room went, exploded.
Oh, my.
But I found that fascinating how he could just turn in, become invisible, and then turn into Robin. It was amazing.
Wow.
It is amazing.
So that was a highlight for me, too.
So you're saying we have the new show to thank us for Robert Blake.
Robert Blake. Now, here's the story about Robert Blake. I didn't mind him. In fact, I thought he was a relatively good guest in all of the sketches. But on the Monday, when you pitch ideas, I had an idea. I had written a script called something like Cockatoo Philosopher. I don't know what it was called. But I was taking Beretta, but the cockatoo had all the information. The cockatoo was the brains of the outfit. And he says, you know what I think of this? And he wiped his bottom with it and threw it at me and hit me in the face. It didn't bother me. I thought, oh, I guess I'm in show business. That's what people do when they don't like your work. I really didn't care. But to the room, it was really offensive. David Sheffield, I remember, just thought, that's the most disgusting thing to this young kid that I've ever seen. And he may have been blackballed for that reason, but it wasn't from me.
Right. There may have been other reasons. Who's to say?
Other things.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, eventually, somewhere there was a guy willing to kill his wife lurking underneath inside his gray matter.
But again,
can we talk about Dick Ebersol a little bit? Because
yes, absolutely.
I think you made a really good point on how, you know, he really saved the franchise in the time that you were there on the show. What was it like, I think, working there at that time? He messed around with the format of things and was still trying to figure some things out. What was it like working with Dick Ebersol?
Well, we all knew that Dick was part of the, with Lorne, to create the show. He was the network executive at the beginning. So he was always a part of the show. Susan St. James said to me, she said, and she, you know, she loves her husband, but she said, I don't understand why my husband's producing a comedy show. He's not funny. But Dick could identify talent. He didn't know how to nurture it. He could just see it when it was there. Eddie didn't need to be brought along. He was just there. Joe didn't need to be brought along. He was just there. So with a neophyte like me, Dick didn't know what to do. But I understood that. And he is the one that nicknamed me No Problem Kroeger. I knew that that was because he has so much on his plate and sensors and the network and ratings and making sure Eddie and Joe are happy and all of these things to have somebody not to worry about. He was very thankful for. And I think ultimately when he brought me to Yankee Stadium, that's how he said thank you, was by saying, okay, you know what? I'll make a place for you. So I always respected him. Did I wish that he were a visionary like Lorne Michaels, who might have seen in me, for example, ways to bring me, to show me the ropes? Yeah, I had wished for that.
Sure.
But it's just not the way it played out. He didn't change the way the show is done in terms of the way the week is done, but he didn't want to replicate Lorne's years either and make the opening exactly the same. So we had our own This Is Black and White New York kind of thing. And then, of course, in the last season 10, right?
Oh, yeah.
It was very, very different with Billy and all that. But I don't know that Dick changed the format so much as comedy changes its format. You know, at that particular time, it was very character-driven, a little cartoonish, less satire. We did good satire, like the buckwheat assassination. But it wasn't like, what did Reagan do this week? You know, it was sort of just occasional. I think that's more the temperament of the country and comedy in general than it was Dick's stamp on doing it differently.
That is one thing noticeably absent maybe from that era, is the political satire, strictly political speaking.
Yes.
That was, in the 70s, that's kind of what they hung their hat on a lot. And it does seem a little less during Dick's. It doesn't really come back until Lorne comes back with, Reagan and stuff like that.
And Brad and Julia and I and Paul Barras really wanted the show to be political. We were writing political sketches. I worked up Walter Mondale, for heaven's sakes. And I did Robert Kennedy with Joe doing a very funny Jack Kennedy. With Terry Garr, who was a delight, by the way. I wanted there to be more of that. I wanted there to be debates where we would really work up these characters and make big, tasty statements about the state of politics. There wasn't much of that.
No, but and it's easy, I think, or easier now looking back to nitpick. But, at the time, you have to give Dick Ebersol credit for trying. He tried changing the weekend update bit, which I know a lot of people didn't like, but at least he was trying to be fresh. They did a lot of those like audience dial-in gimmicks or runners for a little bit. The Larry the Lobster and the Andy Kaufman one is probably the most famous one, voting Andy, which you were in. You were actually very involved in the Andy Kaufman vote off, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I delivered the news live that he lost. I thought the whole thing was a bit staged. I didn't think the voting was real. That's what I thought. Found out later it was real, and that Andy Kaufman was devastated that the audience wouldn't vote for him. Now, in the world of Andy Kaufman, you never know what's real and what's not real, and I still don't know definitively. But I heard that he was really hurt, that he expected the audience to say, oh, of course, bring back Andy Kaufman. And I felt bad. When I look at that stuff, that's an area that I wasn't very good. I didn't know how to be like this on camera. I didn't know how to come out. So I'm doing everything like, a little bit exaggerated.
Right.
I'm seizing my airtime. And that's the one regret that I have looking back, where I cringe a little bit in trying to make something happen that wasn't there. I was too much of a salesman and not just like, the votes came in and Andy, I'm sorry, you're not going to be on the show. Right. If I could change something going back in time, that would be it.
So now we're going into season 10, and what did you know, or did you know that something was going on and Dick Ebersol was going to bring in the hired guns?
Gary, I think I've made it very clear by now that I never know what's going on. I was told that summer, we're waiting to hear if our contracts get picked up. We know Eddie's not coming back. I'm thinking it's going to become the Joe Piscopo and the rest show. And then I hear that offers have been made to Harry Shearer, Chris Guest, Rich Hall, Marty Short, Pamela Stevenson, Billy Crystal. Did I forget anybody? And they're going to want some continuity. That they're all sort of stars in their own right already. We need some support players. Again, I think because I established myself with El Dorco, Ira Needleman, some things, I seemed like a sturdy choice. And then, of course, the others were Mary, Julia, and Jim Belushi. I remember thinking, oh my God, what is it, like 11 people? How nobody's going to have any airtime. But now I look at the cast and there's like 40.
Yeah.
And everybody finds their space. I wish that I'd realized that, just be patient. You'll find the. But I don't think I knew until right before the season started. They picked up my contract and then they told me who was going to be there. And I remember Dick saying, I'm sorry, but your friend Brad Hall is not coming back. And I did go into his office because what Brad had done for me. And I swear he said, if this is about Brad, turn around. It's not going to happen. Now, I was heartbroken. Obviously, Julia was. Tim Kazurinsky's gone. Robin Duke. These were my friends. But at the same time, okay, it's also I have a career here, and I'm going to be on TV with Billy Crystal, Martin Short, part of Spinal Tap. Yeah, I'm in.
And how was it for you guys, the four that stayed on? Because it feels like it kind of reverted back a little bit to the A and B teams, but instead of Joe and Eddie as the A team, it was Billy, Marty, and
you have a very good feel for the show. You really do. You guys have a very honest perspective, a very clear perspective. It did feel that way, and they weren't really looking to include us, not out of any snobbishness, but they had already had formed nucleus of writing styles and things that they would do together, and characters like Ed Grimley and that they knew were going to come out. So the rest of us were sort of picking up table scraps. But I had learned then that doesn't matter. Ingratiate yourself. Sit in their office. So I'm sitting in Billy Crystal's office and he's writing a Joe Franklin piece. And because I'm there, he says, can you do Alan Alda? And I said, give me 20 minutes and I'll be right back in. I came back in 20 minutes and I said, the blood on Klinger's apron is clashing with his paisley dress. And he said, great, you're in. Chris Guest said for something else, he's writing something else. And he says, can you do Robert Mitchum? And I went, this is my miniseries or something like that. Better than what I just did. But I pulled Robert Mitchum out of the proverbial butt. And he said, great, you're in. So I learned how to do it. And then I would write sketches like my Walter Mondale sketches, and I would include them as the fishermen, as the hunters coming looking for bait and tackle from Walter Mondale and his wife, knowing that now I'm going to get their support by writing a sketch for me, but with them. So I'd figured out the formula a little bit.
Yeah. Much easier on your third season rather than that happening on your first. Yeah. Sure.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And again, nobody told me they were going to leave. I thought this is it. Next year, the next year, I'm going to be here for 5 years.
Right. You found out that summer, Dick's gone, Lauren's coming back.
That's so. We found out at the end of the year, everybody said we're not coming back, and whether they're not going to create the Gary Kroeger show. And Dick Ebersol said, no, I'm done now too. So I immediately loaded up the car and moved out of New York. I started a new career in show business in LA, but I would have loved to have stayed. I would have loved it.
If Lauren was going to try to do any kind of connective tissue and asked you to do 11, you would have stayed?
Well, that was made very clear, is that for Lauren to come back, and he came back, he did say, I'm starting over.
Yeah.
I'm starting completely over. And I don't think Lauren had any love for me or really anybody that was involved with the show. Again, you have to respect Billy Crystal and Marty Short, and they're, included, and they've been back to guest hosts, as has Julia, but he had no love for me, not any animosity, but no reason to, pick me out of the group and bring me along.
Speaking of Lauren, you wrote about it on your blog, Gary Has Issues. Let's share the story of how you then find yourself so many years later in between Lorne Michaels and Paul McCartney on national television.
Well, here's the only premeditated thing that I did. I knew that I wasn't going to be in the show because I never am. You know, I'm invited to the party and I'm invited to the show. But generally speaking, the cast gets up at the end, all 167 or whoever shows up. And I put on a tuxedo, but I had a red and black tie. Everybody else was in a bow tie or a black tie. I put on a red tie thinking my wife will be able to spot me in the crowd. She'll find the red tie. That's the only reason. It was the only premeditated thing that I did. But I get to the stage and there's Marty, and I hadn't seen Marty yet. And Marty and I are friends. And I said hi to Marty. And then I'm looking for Brad Hall, who's standing right in front of me, center stage. And I said, Brad, get up here. Then the red light on the camera comes on. I realize that Paul McCartney's to my left. There's Marty. And then to my right, in comes Lorne Michaels. And I thought, well, I'm not going to move. I now know the camera is right here. It would be weird to get out of the way. It would be kind of schmucky, I think, to get out of the way. So I just stayed there. Well, I didn't think anything of it, and I didn't think I was doing anything noticeable, really. It's like, okay, my family can see me, my kids, my wife can see me. At the after party, my phone is blowing up. Kroeger, you were all over the good nights. It was you and Paul McCartney. And they're sending me screenshots. The next day, it's on the front of the New York Times, that picture. And then, you guys can see this, but you can't hear it. The Des Moines Register has a screenshot.
That's awesome.
NPR calls, and I'm doing all of this thing about the picture. And so it wasn't premeditated except for the tie, but, you know, I don't regret it.
I texted Andy Hoagland. I said, Kroeger! Exclamation point when I saw it.
Yeah, and here's the thing. The audience doesn't keep a scorecard. The audience isn't keeping tally. Well, Kroeger, you weren't in any sketches. They saw me in the show. Right. It validated me with the cast. And so people are saying, great show, Kroeger. Loved seeing you. I was part of it. And so I'm tickled to death.
That's great.
Awesome.
We talked about your relationship with the writers, but as you went through those 3 years, were there any writers that you connected with and developed a long-standing relationship with? Kevin
Kelton, Andy Kurtzman, and Andy Kurtzman, Elliot Wald, who's passed. Andy and Elliot have passed away, and Nate Herman sort of became a triumvirate, a Herman Wald Kurtzman script, and I think David Sheffield and Barry Blaustein were a team, and they wrote most of Eddie's stuff. They liked me, but didn't write a lot of stuff for me necessarily. But Kurtzman, Wald, and Elliot conspired with me to do Ira Needleman, for example. Kevin Kelton gave me a lot of opportunities. Julio Iglesias, I think, and the Kennedy sketch where I'm RFK was Kevin's sketch, and he and I are still good friends. Margaret Oberman was a good friend, but Margaret, you know, it was not a female-centric show back then, and now it's very different, which is wonderful. But women had to look out for themselves back then, and Margaret really focused on taking care of the women, and Pam Norris as well. But we were all friends and are still friends. Kazurinsky was always a writer with the show, and Kaz and I mean, we see each other in Chicago. Andrew Smith didn't include me in anything, but Andrew Smith used to always come up to me and say, Kroeger, you're the most talented guy in this cast. I said, yeah, great. Put me in something. You use that talent, would you please? But at the same time, I was flattered that a salty old television comedy writer thought that I was good. So I like Andy to this day.
We mentioned a bunch of sketches and bits, you know, that you were involved with. Looking back, is there anything we didn't touch on that you really liked or you're just really proud of your time there on the show?
Well, we've touched on it. If I may reiterate, I'm sorry for the times for myself that I didn't appreciate it as much as I should. I wish that I'd been taught patience or learned patience and know that it would come. So the fact that we didn't enjoy it as much as we could have at the time is a little bit of a regret. But I am very proud of the fact that I am pretty universally considered someone who's easy to work with and was versatile. I ran into Phil Hartman several years later. I was actually producing a television show for George Hamilton, and we did a spot on News Radio, his TV show. And I went up to Phil and I said, "Hey, Phil, you had the career on SNL I dreamed of. You are my hero. You did everything the way I wish that I knew to do. I admire your career so much." And he said, "Well, thank you, Gary. That's very nice of you." You know, that Phil Hartman kind of voice. But he was very sincere. That meant a lot. That was the career. I was asked the other day, who is the archetype? Well, people are going to say John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd. They're going to say Chris Farley. They're going to say Will Ferrell. They're going to say Kate McKinnon. There's lots of, Kristen Wiig. To me, it was Phil Hartman because he was the utility infielder that even if he was the B character, still made it work. He was the glue. And if you're a performer, it's much more gratifying to be the glue that everyone can depend on, rely on, than it is to necessarily be the star, the one getting all the laughs, the focal point. He did it right. His talent was of such that I don't think there's ever been anyone like him. I think Aykroyd was his idol, and who's to argue? Aykroyd was the same kind of glue. But I think Phil took it even further.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. He's amazing.
I mean, it's just still one of those things. He's not on the planet.
Right.
How is that possible? Yeah. I don't mean to end on a sad note like that, but he left a mark on this show, which has been around for 50 years. Why not another 50? I said that I won't do another reunion, but you know what? If they wheel me out to the 70th because I'm the oldest surviving cast member, yeah, I'll go to that one.
No, that's actually something I wanted to bring up too. You mentioned this on your blog. I don't know if critical is the right word, but it was interesting your thoughts on the 50th, how they put it together and what it was in contrast to the other ones. And it was a very interesting point because I think you're the only person I've heard say something like that.
I admire the show so much, and I admire the cast. I wish I had a relationship with Lauren just so that I could say, Lauren, I think that you're the finest producer in the history of television. But the last two shows, the 40th and the 50th, were really just retrospectives that used the current and semi-recent casts and took their most loved characters and created new sketches. Great sketches, but it's not a retrospective that honors the years. The shows, the 40th and the 50th, have been about Saturday Night Live today. Great show, but the audience wants to see the arc of 50 years. The audience wants to see the Ebersol years. The audience would like to see everybody get a little bit of attention and less live stuff, maybe. Sure, there's going to be some live stuff, but roll the best of, maybe recreate some of it live. Bassomatic live will always be a good idea. But more of something that touches every generation. Because when I talk to you guys, and I've talked to other people, and talked to Keegan-Michael Key, the show has a place in every actor/comedian's heart. And they would like to see those moments. They would like to see those actors.
Yeah.
So that's what I would change. If there's another, I don't have any influence, but I would make it every era, maybe 5-year chunks or something like that.
Yeah. We've talked about that and we've echoed those sentiments. There's one more person that I want to talk about that we talk about him a lot on our podcast is Davey Wilson.
Oh yeah.
And the influence that he had on the show is very apparent throughout, but he was there during your time as well. How was he to work with?
I mean, having the crew, Davey, Al Camoin, the stage managers, the cue cards, the same as were there the original 5 years, really anchored it for us. Because when you get into 8H and you see, okay, Lee Yoshimura is still doing the light or designing the sets, it's all the same energy that preceded. It's really mythic. It's tingly. Davey Wilson, because I remember seeing Alan Zweibel's name go by, and Alan's a good friend now. Alan Zweibel, directed by Dave Wilson. And I thought, who is this Dave Wilson? Because he must be just a mastermind to direct these actors on this live show. And he is a New Yorker. He was older than I thought, a chain smoker, a little bit irascible. But if you made him laugh, you knew that you found something. And he cared about every frame and he cared about every performer dearly, but wasn't a sappy guy. You expect this guy to be sending out cabs, from the central dispatch. He's that kind of guy. But once you create a relationship with him, he's just lights up, and he became a friend. He sent me a case of Piper Heidsieck for my wedding. His son, Michael, and I are still friends, and I saw Michael there. Davey was special. He kept it looking like Saturday Night Live, even if the cast was different, even if the sketch style were different, even if the roll-ins and the media was different. He still kept it Saturday Night Live. And even after, he continued for a while.
Yeah.
And Don Pardo is another one. Don, you said Gary Kroeger. No, Gary, I said Kroeger. You said it again. Kroeger. It's a long O. Gary, I know what I'm doing. And the next week, at Gary Kroeger. Don, you said, and I gave up finally. But he was a wonderful man. For me, the first time you hear your name or something like it come out of Don Pardo's voice, Saturday Night Live, that's when you know you've arrived. Yeah. That was, along with Davey Wilson, it told me that I was there.
Yeah. Oh. Last thing, Gary, you've had a very varied and successful career since you've left the show. Was there anything you learned or took from, and you maybe answered it, maybe that patience thing that you've kept with you all these years that kind of drives you and you use, that you've been using throughout your career since then?
All of it. I was given the gift of graduate school for performance. Not comedy for me, but performance. I learned from Eddie Murphy more than anybody, and Eddie doesn't even know this. Although there was a special moment. Eddie hugged me in the hall, and it wasn't just like, hey, Kroegs. It was like, no, come here. And he gave me a real hug, as if to say, you're part of my story, man. Thank you, and I'm glad you're here. It meant a lot to me.
Oh, that's awesome.
And maybe he read an article that I wrote about him where I said, Eddie gave me the understanding that confidence, not cockiness, confidence is everything. Trust yourself. Trust that you have the ability to communicate. I took that lesson into the rest of my life, into my business life, into my auditioning life, my producing life, everything. Be confident with who you are. Know that you have a story to tell that's unique. No one else can be you. And that's really that. If I were to give one thing to my children, it would be trust yourself. Mm-hmm. I know those are just words, but it means something beyond just feel good about yourself. Know that you are special. Know that you have a place in all of this, and that wherever you are, you, and you, they're lucky to have you in any environment. That sounds cocky, but it's not. Your audience is lucky to have you. They're lucky to have your perspective. You go to a lecture and you're there. They're lucky to have you. You're lucky to have them. It's a very fortunate place to be, this life. And I didn't know that. I don't think anybody comes out. We're figuring out who we are. And I saw in a 19-year-old kid, a guy so comfortable in his skin that you could have given him anything. There could have been a fire in the studio, and he would have kept his composure and gotten us all out safely. And that changed my life.
Wow. That's great.
That's wonderful. I think that's a great place to wrap up here, Gary.
I agree.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, a little daily affirmation at the end. Yeah,
I'm going to clip that and just play it during my meditation every day.
That doesn't suck.
That's right. Gary, this has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Hey, guys,
Thank
I really enjoyed it.
so much.
Brad, Gary.
You can find Gary Kroeger.
Would have been funnier if you said Kroeger.
Damn it. People can find your podcast, the Gary and Kenny Show, anywhere they get podcasts, right?
Yes, and we have a YouTube channel. I love it when they give us a thumbs up or make comments. Say, we like this, we don't like that. It's the only way you grow.
Yep.
You know that.
And your website, Gary Has Issues, is great.
Gary Has Issues. Nobody blogs anymore, but I still do. It's a place to keep my political thoughts. Know that I lean to the left, folks. So if that makes you mad, Gary Has Issues is not for you, but I try to be fair and I try to do research.
Yeah. No, it's really well done. That too. I mean, it's very interesting.
Appreciate it.
Good to read. So, Gary, this has been a pleasure. Thanks you so
guys.
much for your
Thank you
time.
so
We
much,
appreciate it. Yeah.
See you later. I look forward to it.
Thanks for listening to the Not Ready for Primetime Project. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, please take a moment to rate and review the project wherever you find us. You can also drop us a line to let us know what you liked or didn't and what else you might like to hear in the future at nr4ptproject@gmail.com. And lastly, you can find us on social media everywhere at nr4ptproject. Thanks again for listening. Have a pleasant tomorrow.